again, and welcome to the Saturday session of our Phase 2 Southeast Guiding Coalition meetings. For those of you who don't know me, I am Esther Morgan. Many of you know me and have been in contact since we worked together in Phase 1. I do also want to welcome our Board of Directors, Flow Analytics, Karina and Brick Architectural Firm, our principals, our co-chairs, and Southeast Guiding Coalition members who were able to join. I am immensely grateful on behalf of the district that you all would give up your Saturday morning to participate in this activity. It is very important to us, and we're very delighted and thankful that you are able to join us. Analyze the proposals shared on Thursday, the 20th of October. We are going to listen for your input and your discussions. We know that you've had the material for about 2 days now, so hopefully you've had the opportunity to weigh in on so many different perspectives outside of the perspectives that directly impact you because your children attend the school or the school is in your neighborhood. Remember that the goal is for us to make a decision that will be helpful for the collective, and sometimes that means we do have to compromise and exercise some give and take measures. We will not be making immediate on-the-spot revisions as you share the information. What we'll be doing is we'll be taking all your recommendations and suggestions into consideration, and then taking that back to the drawing board to see where it fits and how it impacts and if it's reasonable to do. Again, we all recognize that this is a highly emotional process for many, and passions run high. I am going to respectfully ask that we manage our emotions. Please put something in the chat, send a text, send an email, in lieu of saying off-color things that may interfere with other people's ability to contribute meaningfully to the process. We are determined to listen to all voices. If you feel your voice is not being heard, please let us know. You can always email or text us, and we will listen to what you have to say. So in prior meetings, we did share the Phase 2 charge, which again is converting Harrison Park from a K-8 school to a middle school and trying to find a home for the K-5 students. And we're also working on increasing the enrollment at Lane Middle School. Hence the scenarios you're going to be seeing today. In our attempts to do that, a lot of things surfaced for us. We did realize that we do have to look at our DLI programs and co-location if we're to increase numbers, 500 being the minimum target number for middle school and 270 being the minimum target number for elementary. It also does mean that we'll need to shift boundaries, which means that some of our programs will be impacted. So the purpose of the work today is to look at that and make as many reasonable suggestions as possible. And hopefully we will arrive at something we can all agree to abide by and support. That said, I want to turn the presentation over to Karina.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, I think I want to reiterate what you were saying, Dr. O. So today our main purpose is really kind of to understand better what is surfacing for people as they start to think about and process the proposed first draft of the scenarios, and also to remind us to be mindful of whose voices aren't in the room, right? We want to get a sense of which communities will see the most movement of families and the impacts to those. But we also want to work kind of between the micro and the macro. So thinking about the whole Southeast quadrant and individual schools, right? So knowing that requires kind of a focused effort to kind of zoom in specifically about what the impacts are. I mean, we talked the other day about Bridger, having 2 strands or 3 strands, or what does that look like? But then also thinking about the entire Southeast as a quadrant of the city, and really knowing that this isn't, we talk often in these types of discussions about the numbers and numbers of historically underserved families that are impacted, but we also know that this is more than just the numbers, but about people, right? Individually and collectively. And so I want to reiterate what you were saying, Dr. O, to make sure that we take the time in this meeting to to understand the depth and the complexity to all 21 schools and the families that are impacted, and really to develop an understanding of the scenarios as we work to refine them in future meetings, right? So today, I don't think we're going to get to much refinement, right? That will happen on Thursday. That's the purpose of the meeting on the 4th. That's always been the purpose of the meeting on the 4th. And to understand kind of what the contrasting views are, right? On both scenario A and scenario B. So what we'll do is we'll talk first about kind of the program shifts in general in our breakout rooms, and then we'll talk specifically about scenario A and scenario B, and try to get a good understanding of what the major pros and cons are for each of those scenarios, and for the program shifts as a whole. Does that make sense for folks? Okay. So then the other thing, so Marnie, will you share screen, please? Okay. So we really do want to take a moment to talk about our group agreements, right? Obviously, I don't think we're going to have difficulty staying engaged today. If you showed up on a Saturday, it means you are ultra engaged, and we are incredibly appreciative of that. But we want to invite people to speak your truth, right? You, especially members of the Southeast Guiding Coalition, are here because of your lived experiences, and that makes you experts, right? And so we want to be able to leverage that, and we need to be able to do that in a way that is as equitable as possible. So you'll see us in the breakout rooms to have some structures in place to ensure that everyone gets an opportunity to share their views, and ensure that we've got kind of equity of voice in the room, and that we are continuing to foreground the experiences of those most impacted by inequities, and you know, recognize that we're going to have to a certain extent in and throughout this process kind of suspend certainty, right? And to recognize that we're not going to solve it all in one meeting, right? So really thinking about your willingness to kind of be outside of yourself to the greatest extent possible, and then to reiterate kind of what you were saying, Dr. O, to ensure that we are trying to do this. We understand the heated nature of these conversations, but we want to ensure that we are being respectful of one another as we do this, and that we can engage in these conversations in as productive a way as possible. So I know we normally kind of keep these on here, and they become almost rote in terms of what we hear and, you know, all agree to. But I think it's really important for us to hear from you if there is anything in addition to this that you need, that it will take for you to feel safe and brave to share into the room today. So we want to open up the opportunity for anyone to be able to talk about any other group agreement you'd like to see added, and see if we can't get consensus around that. Does anyone have anything else they want to add in terms of a group agreement on how we'll be in community with each other today?
I had a question about who to email if we have a question or a comment. Which email address do we use?
I'm going to allow you, Megan, to respond to that, if you can. Either in the chat. So what we'll do, Ellie, because I think that is a good question. I believe we're using Discord, right? Did you receive the email that
yes,
where
if we want to contact the people running the meeting
from the district?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like if we have a comment or a question about the process.
So you can email Megan. She works directly with the sponsor.
Okay, thank you.
Also, this is Judy Brennan. Hi. Every meeting, there's a feedback survey, And that'll be available to you at the end of this meeting. We do read those, and then we will share the responses out with the whole group.
Yeah, I got that. I've actually
and you've been responding, and we appreciate it.
Yeah, I've been emailing with Megan, and she's been very responsive. Thank you.
Awesome. We right now, I think our preliminary assessment is that just based on who's here tonight, we have 13 schools represented by parents and guardians of the SEGC group. So I know there was a question about kind of who in the SEGC is here. That's what we know. Okay. All right. So with that, I believe we are going to, Marnie, go into our check-ins, right? I'll let you manage that. And you can go ahead and stop sharing.
Okay, just a moment. So we always like to do a check-in just in order to, I'm no longer host. Gail, when you came back, it took the host away from me. So if you could make me host again.
Yes, let me do that.
Thank you. And so we're going to send you into just quick, small breakouts, just a couple of you together to get your voices in the room, make sure they're working, and also ground you in what we're about to do. So this is a time to put everything else. One of my favorite mentors says, put all of the other things that are happening in your life in a little briefcase and just walk that briefcase right outside of the door and drop it so that you can be right here, right now. Okay, I'm going to recreate these breakout rooms really quick. And so we'll just ask you a question. There we go. Can you ask the question, Karina, and I'll get these breakout rooms remade?
Of course. So given where we are in the season, although it is a beautiful, crisp fall day here in Oregon, one of my favorite times of the year, what we want you all to just kind of, first of all, we use these to get to know one another, right? That's kind of the point of them. So the question we want you all to consider is just to share with one another what your favorite fall tradition is, whether it's something that you do as a family, that you do as a community, just what is something that you enjoy doing in the fall.
Okay, and think about that really quick. Just making sure that these rooms are made again. And we're going to put you in duos, and you're going to have just about 5 minutes to speak with each other. So it's just a quick check-in. Hi, here's my name. And answer your question. Gosh, it's a lot of you. Okay. Okay. Here, and you're moving to here, and that should be it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start these, and there might just be a little bit of reshuffling at the last minute. Off you go.
Everyone, welcome back. Hopefully you shared some good fall traditions. Maybe you learned of some new ones that you can start to implement in your community, in your family. So we wanted to go ahead and get started with Margaret. Oh, thank you. Go ahead, Margaret.
Welcome, everybody. It's good to see folks this morning. I'm glad that we are here to dig in and make sense of a lot of information. So I'm just going to confirm that people have access to some of the presentations from Thursday. And I just want to clarify where they can get that if people need access. Is there anybody that needs access to the materials that were shared Thursday night?
To be sure that they have that, Margaret, I'm going to ask Megan to go ahead and just put it in the chat. So,
thank you so much. All right. So today, as we go and enter into our conversations, I'm going to provide some of the rationale and talk through some of the guardrails, and then Esther will talk through some of the pieces as well. But I think there are a couple of things that I'm just hoping we can hold. Karina spoke to it earlier. Some of the challenges in looking and doing the work, and I know you guys have been engaged in this for long periods of time, is to hold some complexities and tensions together at the same time. So there's this need to kind of dive into specifics while holding the progress and sort of the impacts across a quadrant. So it leads to different levels of complexity as we go through. So that will be one of the pieces. The other tension will be sort of immediate. It's a time tension. Like, so what are some of the immediate pieces that are in place that people are feeling? We're localized in our current experiences, and then what will this look like in the future? So there's some pieces around handling those complexities. So I'm going to encourage us all to really think about those pieces as we go forward in the day, as we try to make sense of the changes and the impacts and movements of people. And I also want to just reiterate what was said earlier around we recognize that we're looking at charts and maps and things, but it really is people, right? So what we're looking at is impacts and discussions around people. And again, I just want to encourage us to be very thoughtful about whose voices we're hearing, whose voices we're not hearing, and how we hold all of these tensions and complexities at the same time. This can be very challenging work, and the goal is always to see where we can improve outcomes, right? So that is our charge. Finally, I think last week, or excuse me, it feels like last week, but it was just 2 days ago, we had a conversation about sort of that this is an iterative process, right? So part of what we're doing is we're going to look at some pieces. There are two different proposals that we're going to look at today, and that then this becomes iterative. So as a district and district staff, a lot of what we're going to work through is listening, developing common understanding, hearing what people are thinking about. So we appreciate, people entering with a sense of curiosity and really formulating questions so that we can have discussion and then and really provide opportunities for listening to each other, and as well as to think about people that we're not hearing today. So with that said, a lot in that moment, but with that said, there are just a couple pieces that I want to make sure that we go back to and as part of what is the frame of our work today. So as Esther said earlier, that the charge of the Southeast Guide, this phase 2 of the Southeast Guiding Coalition is threefold. One is that we're looking at the attendance areas and special programs assignments around Harrison Park Middle School, that we're going to relocate the K-5 students and programs currently at Harrison Park, and that we're looking at plans to increase enrollment at Lane Middle School. So those are the overarching, that's the overarching charge that we have been with. As we go through and we look at this, a couple of key things have surfaced, and one being that we're looking at the impacts on specific programs, but then also on neighborhood schools. And so there's this tension too. This is part of the complexity of when we're looking at programs like creative science or dual language immersion programs. That is part of what the impact is of the proposals. And then there's also a larger impact in magnitude on neighborhood schools as well. So again, these are parts of the complexities that we're going to have to hold today. Ultimately, when we look at the guardrail that we identified last Thursday, one of the key points was around Harrison Park. And so as Harrison Park gets converted to a 6-8 program, that we were committed to moving the K-5 part of Harrison Park as a group to a site. And in this particular instance, the movement is to Clark, which lies within the current Harrison Park attendance boundary. And then, so that's that's one of the guardrails. And it was this, again, reinforces a desire by the community that, as it was stated, to keep the school close to homes, right? So it's close to where the current location is. The second piece that we were looking at is around Creative Science School. And one of the pieces that we said is that it remains a K-8 focus option school with a slight adjustment that makes it similar to what is happening at Sunnyside or Buckman Elementary. So there are two pieces. One is that we have to think about where it's located, because it's currently located at Clark. And so with this commitment to Harrison Park, it means that we have to make a shift for creative science. The question came up about why does creative science stay as a K-8, and what does it mean really for it to be similar to Sunnyside? Like, what does that look like or mean? So Sunnyside was a focus option K-8 that was adjusted to this hybrid. It's not really a hybrid, but it's a K-8 that has a neighborhood associated with it, and that change was made back in 2002. So what you see is that some of the students that come to Sunnyside are through a lottery process, and it also draws from its neighborhood catchment. That change is going to be similar to what will happen with creative science. What happens as far as the assignment of students is that students then in that catchment opt out, and then if that it's an opt out of the creative science program. That is what the difference is. So students are assigned, and then there's an option to opt out, and that is similar to what is happening on Sunnyside. The goal, as was stated, was that we're looking at creative science staying similar in size to about 450 students. And so when we looked at location pieces, those are some of the where creative science would be located. We were looking at spaces where that would happen, facilities that would be available. So that is why Woodstock shows up in Proposal A, and that's why Arleta shows up in Proposal B. So the priority and we can talk about the priority and sort of how that works in the lottery process. But creative science currently is a lottery school with about 300 students at the K-5 level and about 160 at 6-8. Very similar in size to Sunnyside, which has about 479 students. And so it's a good comparator, I guess is what I would say as we go through discussions today. So those are two of the guardrails that we're really looking at. What does that impact on the proposals as a whole? So that's part of what we're going to be exploring today is how does this show up in the proposals? What impacts does it have across the region, right? So there's localized impacts again, and then there are the impacts across the region. So I'm going to pause there for a second and just to go back to one of the other pieces around the guiding principles that comes from the charge is the core values. So the core values that were identified in the phase 2 resolution from the board was to keep students at the center, to think about racial equity and social justice, honesty, integrity, to think about excellence, respect, relationships, creativity and innovation, the partnerships and collaborations we're seeing across grounded in the spirit, be grounded in the spirit of Portland, and encourage joyful learning leadership. So those are the things that help shape what these first two guardrails, kind of guiding posts that we're going to have as we go through this conversation today. I'm going to pass it over to Esther.
Thank you, Margaret. So as we looked at all the schools that will be impacted in this process, we realized that we can't impact schools without impacting our programs. And a lot of the schools that are in the Southeast region that are being impacted are schools that have a DLI program in the midst. So if we're going to increase the number of students at the elementary schools and make the base number 270, we will be impacting those programs. So it behooved us to take a look at the programs in of themselves and determine how well they're servicing students, which students are being served in the program, and how we can better enhance the quality of instruction that we are providing at the school. As you know, a lot of our DLI schools have a single strand. When you want to increase academic achievement and you want to improve the quality of student learning, of course, our ultimate goal is for our students to be bilingual and biliterate. Then we do have to think about a lot of supports for teachers. We also have to think about a lot of redistribution of resources to support the program and to see exactly what it is we're doing to measure the academic growth of students from year to year so that at the end we can truly attain our goal or make shifts. So that in of itself then gave rise to some other questions that we had, hence the design and the model that we're proposing around the whole school GLI program.
Thank you, Dr. O.
Sure.
Okay. I don't know if we have any new faces tonight that weren't able to join us on Thursday, but we did want to have Flow Analytics provide a high-level overview of the drivers and the scenarios themselves before we get into conversation. Jenny Axelrod from Flow is with us today, and we'll be sharing her screen to go through that piece.
Thanks.
And,
Thanks, Karina. Yeah, I'm Jenny Axelrod from Flow Analytics. Jed is not able to join us today due to a family situation. So I'm a senior analyst and the director of operations at Flow Analytics. So I'll share my screen in just a second, but for those that maybe didn't join or those that, we provided a lot of information to, I want to go through some of the drivers that we used in the modeling and how those relate to some of the themes that we just heard from the district on some of the guardrails that we're using here, and just sort of compare and contrast Proposal A and Proposal B before we get into breakout rooms and have a chance to discuss each of these, because as you all know, there's a lot of things going on with these proposals. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of interconnected aspects. And so really want to just, again, talk at a high level, kind of how we go through applying these in the modeling exercise that we go through, because the boundary changes and looking at shifts in these come after layering on a couple steps. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so let me just get some things moved around here for myself. So putting this into the context, again, of the things that we just heard from the district, when we first look at modeling these drivers, we really looked at converting Harrison Park to a middle school. So there was the relocation process of the K-5 students from Harrison Park. And the feedback that was received during the BIPOC listening sessions was that the community really wanted to move together to a new location close to where they live in order to maintain their racial, ethnic, and cultural diversity. So that was the first thing that we sort of layered into the modeling. Second, as we were just talking about, Creative Science School then needs to be relocated because we have a movement over to Clark. And the desire is for that to maintain their K-8 grade levels and become a focus option neighborhood school. So the thought process there is that it requires looking at facilities and locations that can accommodate a 2-strand K-8 program with an enrollment of about 450. So that's only certain facilities will be able in the long term to maintain that enrollment. And then we also looked at the Buckman and Sunnyside models as examples of how this is happening already within the district as a model of developing neighborhood boundaries with also potentially some lottery opt-in options. The third thing then we look at is creating and consolidating Chinese DLI and Spanish DLI into whole school models. And these are really parallel drivers. So again, a lot of these things are interconnected. So as we heard earlier in our discussions here, the premise for this is that there's really more opportunities for cohesive professional learning, multiple strands of peer classrooms, and fewer barriers for DLI entry for newly arrived native speaking students. So trying to think about the justification and the reason for the lens that we're looking at consolidating and creating these whole school models. And then the fourth one is meeting the minimum enrollment targets, thinking 270 for K-5 schools and 500 for middle schools. There's really opportunities for more equitable programming at those enrollment levels. So just want to point out that the boundary changes really are the things that come after we understand the program locations, the grade configurations, and then we can tweak the boundaries to help set the minimum enrollment. So a lot of interconnected aspects here. So let's just take these one by one and compare and contrast draft proposal A and draft proposal B. Looking at converting Harrison Park to a middle school and relocating the K-5 between A and B, everything's exactly the same. Harrison Park becomes a 6-8, K-5 moves to Clark, and therefore CSS currently at Clark needs a location for them. So both proposal A and B, Harrison Park is a 6-8, and those K-5 students move to the Clark building. The second step of that again, then, is looking at creative science and where that's going to go. And now there are differences, as we saw last week, between A and B, one being creative science being at Woodstock, and in B, it being at Arleta. Those facilities were selected based on their long-term ability to be able to house the number of students that are in the programs over time. I think there are potentially other locations that were discussed and looked at, but really needing a critical capacity in order to have those programs be housed in locations that could support the student body. So within both of draft A and draft B, existing CSS students enrolled at would be enrolled at their neighborhood schools based on where they live. So going back into their neighborhood programs. But then we would also establish a neighborhood boundary for the CSS K-8. And those neighborhood students would be able to be then enrolled in creative science at one of these two locations. So those are similar between both draft A and B. Differences then between them again is that there's revisions to the boundaries to balance enrollment, but adjacent but different schools are impacted. And that's where we can start looking at the maps to see specifically which schools are impacted based on the boundary changes. So where a lot of the dynamic nature comes in is looking at creating and consolidating Chinese DLI and Spanish DLI into whole school models. This is where the proposals really differ. In draft A, there's really a focus on locations near native speaking students. And when we get into our small groups, we have some heat maps looking at where native speakers are located and their densities. Those are also accessible via the dashboards that we presented last week. The contrasting idea for draft B is that we're really focused on retaining program locations at or near their existing locations. So this is something that I think is going to be good for the guiding coalition to really look at. I'm not going to go through all of the changes because we'll be able to look at those in our breakout rooms, but they are summarized here, thinking about trying to create whole school models of where we have a K-5 experience that also feeds into a middle school with a similar DLI program serving those students. And then the fourth aspect, as I mentioned earlier, is really then looking at how do we revise boundaries to then meet those minimum enrollment targets once we know where the programs are located and the appropriate grade configurations are. So again, we'll look in our small groups about where these shifts are happening. We have a lot of maps to show where those shifts are. And so this is sort of the fourth part. And again, why we may not be able to look at tweaking the boundaries right now, because I think we can have some robust discussion about these earlier factors that lead into the preset for then looking at any boundary changes. And that's it from me.
Thank you, Jenny. Okay. So now what we want to do is be able to have some discussions about this as a Southeast Guiding Coalition. Like I said earlier, we've kind of broken this up into 3 rotations that each of the breakout rooms will go into. The first one is to talk about the program shifts, both whole school DLI, CSS, and then the impact to neighborhood schools. In the first breakout room, we'll come back together. The facilitators, or sorry, the note takers in those rooms will share back what they heard in their group to start to make some sense around that. We'll have a break after the first one. Then we'll do proposal A. We'll focus on proposal A to really start to understand the strengths and the weaknesses and get to know those scenarios and the new boundaries, who's impacted, all of those things that Jenny just talked about. And then Marnie will lead, because at that point, unfortunately, I have to drop off the call, but Marnie will lead the debrief and sense making of that. We'll have another break. And then lastly, we'll talk about proposal B, go through the same sort of unpacking of that and talking about pros and cons of that scenario. And then we'll allow people to kind of do a gallery walk, if you will. So to be able to get into Miro and start to see what sort of feedback you heard back, more than just kind of what we shared, but what were some of the notes that people had in each of their breakout rooms. So Marnie will orient you to where those are and how to access that. And then lastly, we'll have conversations around hot topics, right? So what are some things we really need to think about as we move this forward and prepare for our next meeting on Thursday, the 4th. So that's kind of our plan. So we're going to stick with our breakout groups that we've had in the past. I'm going to remind the facilitators to record their breakout session. And we will go, oh, looks like Eddie.
And before we
question. Oh, go ahead. Oh, yes. Sorry, Esther, you're right.
Sorry, before we go into the breakout sessions, I just wanted to draw everybody's attention to the fact that we do have a study that was conducted by the RAND Research Organization. It is a 5-year-old study. So if you do want to look at it, it centers around DLI programs in Portland Public Schools. So if you're interested in accessing that study and taking a look at it, that would be great. It also does talk about a little bit about where native speakers live, and that will be reflected in chat.
So can I ask my question now?
Sure.
Yes, Eddie.
Yeah, thank you. Just really quick, I just want to clarify, and Margaret, thank you I think you answered a lot of my questions when you presented. Thank you a lot. So my question is, I would just like to know, I mean, looking at that presentation from Flo, 1, 2, and 4 were part of the original charge, and that makes total sense. Number 3, though, just seems like it was just kind of added. And I think from the last, that's consolidating DLIs and things like that. From the last presentation, it was mentioned that SEGC and with instructional leaders came up with that. And my question is, for sake of transparency, I would like to know who, like specifically, came up with that plan and drafted these proposals. And the reason I ask that is not, I don't want to name call or pinpoint people, but it's one of those things where when we move forward, I think it's important to know who came up with these proposals specifically, so we can know whose voices and whose interests were represented in that decision. And yeah, so I was wondering if someone could answer that question.
Dr. O, do you want to take a shot at that?
I think it's a question that will be better answered maybe by Judy. I do have some insight on it because in looking at the boundary shifts that we had to make and fulfilling the charge for phase 2, we did realize that we were going to have to move some schools, which means we would impact programs. Hence the reshuffling of the programs to ensure that we meet the charge, which is to have a minimum of 270 at the elementary and 500 at the middle. So that's really what triggered that process.
What I will add in is that we interviewed and gained input from principals, DLI, and other principals. We shared that input with instructional leaders in the Division of School Communities, including Dr. O, Margaret Calvert, and Deputy Superintendent Dr. Sean Bird. And the decision was made at that level and also was seen as both in support of the charge, where the charge clearly says guidance coming from PPS staff on program moves, and seen as essential program moves to support the other elements of the specific phase 2 charge and the overall SEGC, or Southeast Enrollment and Program Balancing charge, that was provided by the board in 2020. I hope that's helpful.
Was there any input specifically from like native speaking communities as part of that process? I know we've seen the results from the stuff this summer, but like, was this something that you guys did any separate? Is there anything else on that front that we could see that you weighed in the decision?
I think the input of native speaking communities came in both through what we learned in phase 1 and what we learned in working with families at the school level. So a lot of that came in through our school level input, mostly through principals, as well as native speakers that we know are or are not accessing DLI. Also input from the former dual language director. He's now a principal at a school, or other pieces of the input that led to the decision. And again, I am kind of tag teaming here with Dr. O.
Thank you, Judy. Okay, Marnie, I believe you're going to provide some orientation to the Miro board and kind of how the breakout groups are going to work. And this will be this conversation around these program shifts will be the first thing that we talk about. And there are subject matter experts in every room. So if there are further questions around that, we can get into that as we work into our first breakout group. Go ahead, Marnie.
So I just shared my screen in Miro where we will be working today. And hopefully you are all comfortable in here already. We've been in here a few times. If you are not, there will be someone in your room who is. So just have them capture your ideas. I'll show you a couple of the ways we are going to do it. Also, I think we didn't say that this meeting is being recorded, of course. I think you've heard of it already, that voice come on, but just to remind everyone, everything's recorded, the chat's recorded, all the breakout rooms are. So all of our, everything we capture is recorded, as well as on the Miro board. So last week, again, I was going to say Thursday, we worked in this area capturing notes. We're going to work in this area of the board today, October 30. So I'm just going to zoom down. A couple of things to notice down here are those guardrails again, and the charge that we spoke of earlier, and the guiding principles, which come from this document. And if you ever need to know more about a document, you can actually download it and read this document of where it was, this resolution that was passed or codified that day. So this is where that information is coming from. Here it is just larger for you to reference. These are our breakout rooms. So we'll have our first round of breakouts, these small colored bubbles. Then we'll get into each of the proposals. So here's proposal A, here's proposal B. First off, we're going to start here. Reminder, largely our group agreements. And then up here, our reference. So we have the key to the proposals is up here, how to read them again. Jed walked us through that on Thursday. We have the 2 different proposals here. We have how to read the boundary map at the top. And we also have those heat maps that we were just speaking to. So density of Spanish native speaking households in the Southeast is here. Chinese speaking households, creative science, Japanese, and Russian. Ooh, I'm going to mute you, Sandra. There we go. So that is just to orient you in the board altogether. We are going to dive deep into these, and I'll show you more how to do that next. This time will be right here. So I'm going to give you the link to the Miro board. We're going to break out into our breakout rooms just as we have before, same rooms. And this time again, we're just talking about these impacts, the whole school DLI CSS impacts, just these program impacts and what this means. And then the next 2 breakouts, as Karina said, will be the actual proposal breakouts. So I'll put the link in the chat to, oopsies, that's not the link. I'm gonna put the link to this. It's me, please, in the chat. So you'll jump right in right here. And we're going to come in here and we have note takers assigned, but also just grab some sticky notes and capture your ideas as well. And you'll go to your room. We have the Clackamas room, we have the Columbia room, and the Willamette room, just as we have been doing. And I'm going to go ahead and open the rooms. Does anybody have any questions about logistics?
Just a note, the DLI study and heat maps require permissions.
In the chat?
Yeah, the 2 links that were sent out. I had to request access to them. So
thank you, Harmony. We'll go ahead and get that cleaned up and be sure that everyone with the link can access them.
And maybe add that to the SCGC folder.
We will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
They're also available from the scenario dashboard. All of the maps are available at the bottom of the scenario dashboard as separate as well.
And then Jenny, will you also add your presentation to the SCGC Google Drive so we can share that as well? Thank you. All right. Go ahead, Marty.
Ready? Okay, I'm opening all of the rooms. We have, it's 11:57, so we're a little bit behind time. Do we want to go 15 minutes in the breakouts?
Yes.
You think, yes?
That will.
Okay,
Yes.
let's go. We'll go 15 minutes and we'll all come back and meet here. See you in just a moment.
It's a Zoom breakout, so we'll get back to that when we get back together for sure. Thank you, Marnie. Why don't we start with Clackamas? So Kathleen, if you wouldn't mind, will you share back some of the questions and some of the feedback that we got in our room, and I will try to chime in where I can.
Yes, absolutely. I'd be happy to. Yeah, the 2 of the biggest themes that came up in our room is mainly the impact on the schools where CSS is being proposed to go, Woodstock and Arleta, and on those communities specifically. The other question that came up was why those 2 schools were chosen. And one of the things that was discussed was the size of the schools and the capacity of the schools. But again, the message that kept coming up was, what is the impact then on the current students and families at Woodstock and or the current families and students at Arleta? Was there anything else? Those were the 2 main themes that I remembered.
I know.
Yeah, the other question that I remember specifically is, and as this proposal rolls out, right, what is kind of the phasing of it specifically? There was a question around there's a recollection that there was board direction about Kellogg, and students who are in Kellogg can kind of matriculate out of Kellogg. And so will that be honored meaning it feels like there are impacts to the Kellogg community as part of this. And so can those students continue to stay at Kellogg through their program? That was one question. There was another question about
The other question.
Oh, go ahead, Dr. O.
Oh, sorry. The other question was about the CSS program. How much does the Alita community really know about the CSS program? And what are their thoughts about it? And for that question, I think part of it is information about the CSS program is on the school's website. But if people need more, then we can provide more information.
Kathleen, I was just going to add to your summary on the CSS thing. We did also, I think the question came up specifically if there needs to be more clarity on how the opt-out would work, or what the middle school, like, do you have to opt out of kindergarten? Do you get a chance to opt out after fifth? Like, how do the middle school options in particular work? That needs to be clear at some point.
Yeah. And then I think the last question that we had specifically from Arlita was the question around why is that being transferred as a K-8 and not as a K-5? And what is kind of the driver behind that? So those are the kinds of questions that we have. Okay. Marnie, will you move us to Columbia and have someone share back there, please?
Sorry, I was on mute. There's a lot of discussion around the rationale about CSS retaining its K-8 status. And even though that was addressed, there's still some questioning about that, and specifically around the program review and why that wasn't done earlier, or there wasn't foresight to have that accomplished as part of this process. And then also a question was raised if a similar program review wouldn't have to occur if converting Arlita or Woodstock from a K-5 to a K-8, because that would also be a program change of sort. And so there was questions around that. And also concerns about that we have not heard adequately from certain marginalized communities. And those are the very communities that would have important insight into some of the non-negotiables. And so there was concern that we haven't heard from them enough. And at this point, it seems like it's too late for them to be able to influence some of those non-negotiable things. And Margaret or anyone else want to chime in with any others? No. Okay.
And last, the Willamette room.
Judy, would you like to, or would you like me to?
Sorry. I think we heard about primarily Harrison Park and Woodstock impacts in the few moments that we had together, specifically around Harrison Park. You know, we used a statement earlier, you saw a statement earlier about keeping Harrison Park together, but in fact, both of these proposals move the Chinese immersion program. So our language and our intent seems to be inconsistent. And that was noted. Additionally, the significant consequences for Woodstock, both in the neighborhood side and in the dual language immersion side. And I think also concern about the cultural insensitivity of moving to a DLI only school, where experiencing other cultures is a high priority. And Eddie, I hope I'm not misstating the concerns that you expressed. They were important, and those were, I think, the primary. Others want to?
Okay, Judy. Yeah, I think you did a really good job. Thanks for if you want me to clarify, I just want to mention that, in a lot of Asian American cultures that being part of America, right, is a big deal. And I just want to say that having a DLI only school, the cultural and sensitivity part comes from, like I can only speak from, my own personal culture and what I was raised, but I was just saying, like, if my parents who are immigrants had to choose to send their kid to a DLI only school, they would say no. Because one of the things is that a big part of our culture was trying to fit in, trying to be part of our community. And, like self-segregation is not, it's not okay. And so that's one thing I kind of mentioned there. Oh, thanks, Judy.
Okay. Any other feedback from any of the other groups? Anything anyone feels was missed in the recap?
And I do want to partially respond to the segregation piece of it. Being a DLI school doesn't mean that it's just going to be accessible to only the people who speak that language or in that culture. It's a balance between language arts and the native language, except it's in the DLI setting, kind of like what we have at Richmond Elementary School right now. So it does not keep our students from engaging, participating, and being immersed in the American culture.
I have a comment that I think wasn't addressed in any of the rooms, if you don't mind here. I have heard from other people, and I also have my own concerns regarding the choice to mimic the Buckman and Sunnyside enrollment procedures. That is the neighborhood focus hybrid, and what equity issues that will present, because you kind of create these two separate classes. I say that as a parent who had a kid enrolled in Buckman and chose not to go there. But also just people are concerned about what sort of equity issues that's going to create, how that's going to affect the neighborhoods that are automatically enrolled into these schools, and why PPS considers Sunnyside and Buckman to be successes that they'd like to model this on.
Thank you, Sandra. Okay.
Karina, you were muted there.
Yep, I believe I went to unmute myself and then remuted myself when I was speaking. I believe we are now at a point where we are taking a 5-minute break, correct? We are actually, so we will come back together at 11:28. Seems like a random time, but let's just go 5 minutes. And then we'll all get together to talk about the pros and cons of proposal A. Okay, see you all in 5 minutes. We are being recorded, so we are back together. The goal now is to go into our second of our breakout rooms, and we are doing well on time, so we'll go ahead and hold this one for 20 minutes, Marnie. And we will be focused right now exclusively on scenario A. So as you will see when we go down into our breakout rooms, we will have the scenarios with us, or the proposals with us, and we will be able to speak to those directly. Okay, so remember to hit record, and Marnie, will you push us into our rooms, please?
I am going to.
Oh, go ahead, Eddie.
Sorry. Yeah, I was wondering if you could answer Sandra's question. I feel like she asked a really important question, and it was just we kind of moved on to break. Sorry, I just want to. I don't know if you have time to do that, but that'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. So here's what I'm going to propose, because in the second part of our meeting, we're going to do some hot topics, and I'm going to guess right now that the CSS placement, the rules around it, who it affects, how we got there, is starting to sound like a hot topic. And so why don't we go through A and B, and then I would like to come back to that, but I also want to make sure that we've heard what's also coming up in those. Is that okay?
Yep. We got a thumbs up from Eddie.
Thank you.
Okay. Marnie, will
Okay.
you push us into our rooms?
I do want to just give you a little bit of orientation here. So again, we each have our own room for our groups, and each group has all of the maps associated with the proposals. And when you see these little red dashed circles around things, so here is an, for example, Harrison Park and Woodstock, the K-5 Chinese DLI program is going to Bridger. If you see these little arrows and you click on it, it will take you right to that area of what is being affected. So it's just a little way for you to kind of orient yourself with these maps. It's a lot. This is the overall map with each of the areas surrounding it. And this, again, as we learned yesterday about the way the striping goes, is K5 versus K8. And here, I believe that's what it is. The instructions for the maps, like one more time, are at the very top. So here's reading boundary maps. So K8 boundary changes are the left facing dashes, right facing are K8. When it's hatched both directions, it's both. These are, again, the instructions, the code, and this is at the very top. Sorry, hold on to your seats. At the very top, the proposal key, the proposals in full, reading the boundary maps, again, those heat maps. And this was our first breakout room. This is our second breakout room where we are discussing proposal A. So all the Clackamas folks will have all of the data here in one spot, and there's a little pile of sticky notes that you can grab them. And if you think, what will happen if we move this boundary over here? This is going to affect 30 families. What does that mean? If we move this over here, what does that mean? Remember, we are affecting 21 schools here. So
Right.
Lots of effects happening. These boundaries do make a really big difference to a lot of people's lives.
Right. Marnie,
So-
I think that's a key point, right? That as we talk about the pros and cons of these, really what we want to consider is what is the issue that we're trying to address with the boundary change or with the scenario, who is impacted, why this is of interest and importance, and how can these issues be improved, right? And to try as best we can. I mean, obviously we understand that the feelings around your own school are going to be the primary drivers. But what are the impacts on the other 21 schools, and thinking about this as best as we can as a holistic response to Southeast, especially those most impacted communities. So with that, Marnie, I will have you push us to.
I'm going to give one more instruction.
Yes.
So the other thing is, I forgot to say last time, and I said in our small room, because we have such short time together, there are 20 minutes. And when two people talk for 5 minutes, that takes up half of our time. So we're going to do everything we can to take turns speaking. So if you've spoken, we're going to have you go to the end of the line and allow other voices. Some people's voices will not break through yours. So remember, take space and make space. Speak up if you have something to say. Please remember there are people who take a few minutes to process before they can speak, and allow them to also have floor time. So with that, I will send us off into our small groups. Welcome back. I know it's not enough time. This is why the meeting was originally a 5-hour meeting, and we shortened it to 3. So this is what happened. Okay, so do you have any specific questions? Do we want to go room by room? Do you have questions, or did anybody, our room did not, we just barely got to scratch the surface. Can we hear from, we'll start with Columbia again. Sorry, Clackamas again. And I'll share my screen so you can see.
I can share a concern that came up in our room. Something that was discussed is that there seem to be a lot of exceptions for programs that are higher SES, more affluent, maybe have more white students, are more centrally located. And it's really hard to understand where program exceptions are being made and why. and which programs don't have exceptions being made and why. Even though the data can support changes that are suggested, it's hard for communities potentially to trust why there are some exceptions.
Was that captured in your room? So we make sure we have that.
Yeah, that was in Columbia. That's captured. And we're
sorry. I called Columbia first and then I moved to Clackamas. Okay, we'll go back to Columbia. So I see, will the shift happen immediately? What pros and cons? Have we thought about the rates of learning for the programs?
Yeah, and that was a different item. So there was questions around how this would be phased in. And for example, if students enrolled in DLI programs at schools like Kellogg, which has a Spanish DLI, if they would have the option to stay in their school and finish out their time there, or if they would be immediately forced to relocate, and then the difficulty of having to have that kind of disruption. So that was another item, yeah. And then just questioning whether there was concern that, I guess in, I think it was in the previous phase, as I understand it, where some communities were concerned about the heat map approach and found it offensive, and concern about almost like a segregation or separate but equal approach that could lead to disinvestment in marginalized communities long term.
Do we know the answer to that question about the technical question about the DLI students currently at Kellogg, or is that TBD? Because I'm getting that question a lot too from folks in my community. I don't know if Judy or anyone knows off the top of your head.
I'm sorry, I'm having some technical issues, so I've missed bits of the last minute.
Oh,
can you clarify the question?
It was the question about, so and since in these scenarios, a lot of some or all of the Spanish dual language at Kellogg would go to Harrison Park. And I think there was a policy from the board that students who start at Kellogg can finish. Are we imagining that would apply in the DLI situation, or is the assumption that the DLI programs would move immediately if they move?
Okay, so the board approved the resolution for Kellogg that said all of the kids who go there in the neighborhood program can stay. It's technically not specific to the program students as well, but it may have been their intent. And we are going to need to check on that factor, because it will definitely matter if something like proposal A moves forward. And our goal is to start Harrison Park as a strong middle school as soon as possible. So we'll have to think about the best way to do that. As we get close, as we can narrow, maybe, if the next step is narrowing down to the greatest strengths and trying to put those together, these implementation plans also start to come together.
Okay, how about the Columbia room? Do we have the person who took notes?
That was Columbia, sorry.
I'm sorry, they're both C words. They're the same word in my head. Clackamas.
Andy, do you want to speak on our behalf?
Oh, geez, I don't have it open. I can try, or I don't know if someone else wants to. I'm happy to jump in. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm sharing screen too, Andy. Can you see it?
Oh, okay. Hang on. Okay. I'll start, but people should feel free to jump in because I didn't think about how to synthesize this. Some stuff we talked about. The issue came up about Harrison Park's access to DLI and the effects of moving that program, and this scenario potentially working better than B on that front, since you'd have the Chinese DLI program going to Bridger instead of Woodstock, but on the other hand, this proposal has the most sort of extreme effect on Bridger, right? Because you're turning over every single student who's currently at the school. So there's some tension there. You see the question here about, kind of came up at the end about whether CSS as a whole school is non-negotiable. We kind of put a pin in that one for now, but I think we all agreed that some more clarity there would be helpful. I had made the comment that my sense was that even though the interesting thing about this scenario is that when you look at our metrics, the RESJ metrics we set for this, it seems like this one does a better job than proposal B on hitting those, but you can see there's a lot more geographic wonkiness or whatever you want to call it required to make it happen, right? Especially in terms of some of the neighborhood program shifts. So that was just kind of an interesting observation. We talked a bit about the shift in the lane area with involving that sort of sliver between, with Whitman and sort of there was a good conversation there, both about just sort of the practical effect and the potential concerns there about people who perceive Whitman as a place, as a less, quote unquote, less desirable option, and sort of all of the fraught stuff that raises. What else am I missing though, other folks?
We also talked about the high school trajectory being impacted because the kids at Whitman and I think Lane eventually end up at Cleveland, away from the rest of their cohort, something to that effect.
Yeah, and just general questions about sort of, does this change any high school boundaries by default, where you're, for example, shifting Atkinson into to Hosford? And it sounds like the answer there is not by default, but there was the conversation about sort of, well, does this anticipate future high school changes, and how do we talk about that when there's questions from the community?
Chris Gustafson.
I was really happy that the two areas I particularly represent, Lane and Whitman, in this scenario are bumped up in their enrollment, just as our goal is, and they're bumped up in a way that incorporates contiguous communities. We're just expanding out a little bit. That felt hopeful and respectful for communities that don't always get those responses.
Thank you. Okay, in looking at the time, we still have a lot to cover, so let's move to Willamette. We don't have a lot of stickies. We looked kind of in depth at this area, what's happening. Oh, that's new, actually, great. We talked about Arleta, we talked about crossing, here it is, crossing Foster Road, looking at boundaries and how boundaries are drawn in relationship to the terrain, and having to look at safety and intersections. We talked about that this is a lot of data. It's a lot of data to navigate. It's a lot of data to absorb. And that, with that being said, this is up, this mural board, for you to come in and look at and follow around if you would like to spend more time in here. And the dashboard, this is all taken directly from the dashboard. So all of that information is in the dashboard to get more oriented with it. And with that being said, we have to move on. So we are now going to dig into proposal B. So it's laid out exactly the same way. The proposal is at the top. Again, there are links in here to the areas being affected. So if you click on the arrow, it will take you to that area. It takes a moment. Also, these are very large. So if you zoom in on something and it's very fuzzy, it just takes a minute for it to regenerate and render. So we are in our same groups again. Again, please recognize the space we're in. Please recognize that we are in a virtual container. And when one person is speaking, that means the rest of the people in the room are not. So maybe let's make sure other people have a chance to hear their voice too. All right, so let me open up the breakouts and I will send us off. This time we are 11:58. We should have 20 minutes this time, and we'll come back and discuss it. Off we go. Can you imagine if we had 5 hours? this would be like. Okay, so again, we'll do a debrief, and then we are going to allow everyone to take a little gallery walk in Miro. I'm not sure if that will be as helpful as we thought it would. Maybe let's go through this debrief and see where we are. Again, I will start with Clackamas, Columbia, and I'm going to share my screen so you are all with me. There we go. So in looking at these, I'm seeing stickies around here. And is there someone who would like to speak to your discussion in this room?
Marnie, I just wanted to make sure I didn't hear that we're recording. Did I miss it? Are we recording this?
Cat? Sorry, I thought that came on automatically. Okay. Who is it in the Clackamas room?
I'm willing to share. I was taking the notes, but if somebody else would like to, feel free to speak up right now.
Why don't you start, Ethan, and we can like jump in if there's.
That sounds great. So there's kind of a lot covered, and I'm just going to kind of go around the little frame there. There was notice that in terms of the metrics listed here, that they were a little bit less than scenario or option A. One of those was noticed that Mount Tabor is actually still below the 500 threshold, and that would be most likely a temporary drop. And so there was questions about how staffing would be alleviated around that issue. It was noted that this is a little bit of a reversive scenario A with regards to Chinese DLI at Woodstock creates transportation barriers for those families at Harrison Park. It was raised that those families oftentimes don't drive and rely on public transportation. There was a lot of concern expressed about CSS at Arleta, with Arleta moving from a K-8 to a K-5, back to a K-8, and some of the other struggles that Arleta has been going through. There was a desire for the district's expertise to be heard with regard to both of these scenarios. There was some interest in hearing kind of what the district was thinking, especially around the non-negotiables, and a desire to have the information to be able to sell that to communities and be able to draw clear lines between the non-negotiables and any sort of equity impacts. Anything else?
I think we also expressed concerns, and this goes with both scenarios, honestly, for a request for clarification of how this is going to work for either Woodstock or Arleta when you have these schools converted to a K-8 and both the focus, option kids are going to be allowed to opt out for a middle school. Like, what does that leave behind for the 6th through 8th grades at those schools?
Okay. We'll move on to Columbia. And it looks like this is where the energy was.
Would anyone else start if not, but since I've started the last couple times, if anyone else would like to. You take yours. Okay, so yeah, some of the things talked about there. So there was concern about the impact to schools like Marysville. The demographic shift would potentially result in the loss of Title I status and the financial implications of that. There was a lot of concern expressed that Arleta is greatly underrepresented in the feedback received to date, and they, relative to the impact to their school, they haven't been involved yet in this process to a great degree. And also the desire to have more transparency with the fact that Arleta was selected as a potential site for CSS. A discussion that Kellogg, so during phase one, the fact that there would be a DLI strand, Spanish strand at Kellogg, that was part of the recommendation, and that concern that it would seem unfair to switch that now. Yes, there was some reporting back that at Harrison Park, there was some feedback from the Chinese communities that they were not a fan of this plan. Let's see, anyone else want to add anything?
Okay, let's move on to Willamette. I'm going to pull these up here so we can see them all at one time. I can share. So we talked, these are some, yeah, we talked about transportation and what does it mean when programs are moved, not only during the day, but what about events at night? And not just moving the students back and forth between classes, but class and home, but also events at night and the families needing to get there when now they have access and they lose access. And there is some lack of faith in the bus system as it is right now, and reliability, and that these distances may become greater than usable. Also, a request for resources through the transition. Someone come speak to the schools so that everyone understands what's happening and it isn't happening to them. Also looking at some of the data points and the metrics, the difference between percentages and actual number of students affected, that percentages can be deceiving. We also talked a lot about what information is available on that dashboard, and we did spend one of the meetings going through that dashboard and trying to get your hands around it, and it is admittedly dense. There are 21 schools. This is a lot of data with all of these little jigs and jags of boundaries. So Flo is going to have more time for you to come and work with them if you'd like to understand that dashboard better. Get in there and maybe wrap your arms around it a little bit. It's a lot. It's a lot. And we're looking at Southeast, not even PPS. So with that, we notably skipped our break to give you a little more time in there. So please manage your energy. If you need to take a quick break, just turn your camera and mute yourself, turn your camera off, mute yourself, and feel free to step away if you have to. We are going to move on. The idea was to have a gallery walk in Miro. I heard a lot of feedback that this is a lot to walk through. So I think we should just open it up for discussion. We have a little bit of time left. It's 12:30. We have 15 minutes to talk about kind of what we heard today in our small rooms and what we shared out loud to just discuss it. And then we also have 15 minutes to what we're calling hot topics. So, and that is kind of the end of our day with a closing. So I'm just going to open it up. I'd like to reiterate that we'd like to hear voices maybe we haven't heard, anyone who hasn't felt their voice has been heard. And I recognize that when your voice is heard and there isn't an answer, it feels like you haven't been heard. But we are hearing what you're saying. We are capturing what you're saying, and we'll do everything we can to answer the questions that are out there. So why don't we use hands this time? And let's just discuss what we've heard. I've zoomed way out on all of our boards that we've been across today. So we heard about proposal A, we heard about proposal B, and we discussed the program changes. So let's just raise hands if you have issues or questions, and we'll go We'll go around the room. Is the chat on as well, if people would rather share that way? Beth, hi.
I would love to hear some responses to the hot topic that Sandra brought up earlier around the more information about the K-8 access to middle school within either Arleta or Woodstock neighborhood community. And I know that there are more sort of follow-up questions around that, around the assignment and things like that. But for me, the baseline is how does this meet our charge of having access to middle school programs that we have determined is a model that that we've said works better for these students in the neighborhood program assigned to a reassigned to a K-8.
I can briefly address that. So either neighborhood that becomes sort of the host and converts to the creative science school, the constructivist model, students in that neighborhood who want to opt out will have the right to do so. And particularly students at the end of 5th grade, like even if they stay in creative science through 5th grade, who then want to access their comprehensive middle school, they would still have a named comprehensive middle school that they could access.
Okay, but that's a lot different than like using a community.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the.
Go ahead, Beth.
I just think that that's a lot different than having a middle school assignment that your community goes to together and having students who, so then having families make that choice between, do I allow my middle school age student to remain with their community, which we've heard from communities all across Southeast that that's a really important priority as they transition into middle school, or whether we opt out of this neighborhood program we've been assigned to, this K-8 program, so that my student can have access to a robust middle school experience.
Okay, I understand your comment. I just wanted to make sure that in terms of just the technically how we plan to do it, whether I'm not arguing that that's the only way or best way, but technically, did that description make sense?
Yes, and just to clarify, that's not the case at Sunnyside, right? They do not have an assigned automatic opt-out that they can access.
As Margaret Calvert mentioned at the beginning, we had opt-out options for the Sunnyside neighborhood at the time of that conversion. And it was the schools that those kids would have had, in Sunnyside, before Sunnyside and the environmental middle school combined. So that's sort of what's giving us the road path forward here.
So I appreciate the explanation, and I don't know that the use of the word host is going to be the most positively favored view, a way of saying that the school would be coming into another school. Just as an Arleta parent, that sounds a little bit disturbing. But my question is, I appreciate that technically people are going to have something, but what they're technically going to have and what that looks like in practice leaves a huge gap of questions for people that I feel like need to be addressed at this time and not after the fact.
Very good point, Sandra. Thank you. And also recognize all of you are speaking for a lot of people who can't be here to have their voices heard. And it's a lot that you speak out, and we appreciate it. Are there any other responses or reflections on pros and cons of A versus B? Did any of you get to dig into that? Andy?
I do have a thought on that. I actually just wanted to build on what Sandra and Beth said just before we leave that topic. And again, I don't think this is something that needs a response, or probably there is a response for right now. I share this in our small group room. at least for me, like the reason I'm interested in hearing a level more detail about the rationale for both the CSS decision and the DLI, the whole school DLI decision, even though they're non-negotiables. And by the way, I appreciate, because some of the feedback from phase one from coalition members was, we actually want the district to give us clear direction here. So I appreciate that you took the feedback. But if I don't feel equipped, as someone who's trying my best to even see the big picture here, right? I actually don't feel equipped to explain when I get questions from community members what you guys are going for here. I mean, I know you provide some very high level details. And if you can't get us to the point where we understand that, I don't know what hope there is for you to take this to the wider community. And then we can't do our job as coalition members to sort of explain that. And because if you can't get people over that hurdle, it's hard to get them to engage with the substance of the proposals, right? And so I would really encourage us to come back to somehow the question Beth raised about how do the decisions around CSS and the whole school DLI, how do those a little more concretely meet the spirit of our equity goals, right? And I'm not even talking about from a point of agreement or disagreement. I just don't feel like I can explain that right now. And if I can't, and if we can't, I don't know what, you know what I mean? So I'll stop there, but that's my reflection.
Thank you, Andy.
I'm sorry, I effectively am three people right now because I'm literally the only well, Kathleen is our representative for our LEDA now as well. Our principal's out. I just wanted to piggyback on what Andy said. Look, I want to understand. I want to be pro, what's going to be best for everybody. Like, I really want to do that. I have voted against our interests in some ways because it was the best thing for everybody. And really, I think we all want the best for everyone. But if we can't answer these questions for our community with concrete answers, or at least more concrete answers than a word like technically, then we're not going to be able to sell the whole package. We're not going to be able to get past those major questions of, are my kids going to be able to go to this school? Or are we going to be able to go to a middle school? Or what middle school? Or even what choice of middle schools? To the point where we can say, okay, well, let's look at the CSS program. Let's look at the CSS families. Let's see what benefits this could have for our neighborhood and for our school. Because those other questions are kind of the gatekeepers behind getting down to that sort of nitty gritty.
This is Christy from CSS. Can I share a little bit, I think, about what I'm hearing from my parents? I think when I look at the high school model, there's one branch that's our comprehensive high schools. And there's this whole other branch called multiple pathways. And there's a lot of different options. There's online schools, there's MLC, which is like all the way through 12th grade. There's Benson. And I think the thought there is that, not every kid is going to thrive in a large comprehensive high school model. And some kids need just different environments and have different learning needs. And as we transition to a more comprehensive middle school model, I think what I'm hearing my community say is that some kids do need other options. There are a lot of parents who want access, just like I think most kids go to a comprehensive high school. But as we transition, I think going to like one extreme to the next and having no multiple pathways at the middle school level is something I think my community is advocating for. I can't speak to the location or how, but I think just keeping multiple pathways an option as we're converting to more comprehensive middle schools. Like, how can we create those multiple pathways like we have at the high school level in middle school as well for families that need a different learning environment for their kids?
I still have the question why CSS is being transferred over as a K-8 when we have gone to so much trouble to abolish the K-8 program, particularly in the area that they're looking to transfer to.
Thank you. I appreciate the conversation around this. I also want to make sure we have room for other voices and other concerns. So Eddie, are you piggybacking, or is this a new concern?
Yeah, I'm piggybacking. I mean, I just want to say, in the best interest of CSS, I mean, if they just go into school and displace so many people, and then that becomes also, like, I think what Beth just said in the chat was perfect, being part of the neighborhood program as well, that could also dilute the goals of CSS as well. And I was just wondering if there was any possibility of a different option, a different location, or a underutilized building. It just seems like either proposal A or B kind of puts CSS in a raw position, kind of. Yeah.
Thank you, Eddie. How about any of the voices we haven't heard, but we have talked about this issue? Are there other issues you see and need to talk about? Alyssa.
Sorry, I had to leave for a second, so I apologize. With the CSS moving to a whole school, I'm a little bit confused. It doesn't seem like it's presented what is going to happen if a significant number of the neighborhood kids opt out. And maybe you've already touched on that, but I guess, is there a plan? Like, if it ends up under enrolled, and then where will all those neighborhood kids go for either Arleta or Woodstock? Either one.
Is there someone who can speak to that?
So I think part of, so I guess I'm trying to think about how to frame this. So I think that part of the question, we talked about a little bit in our small group, so I'm glad to kind of bring it up with everyone, is that as we're looking at, there's a lot of moving parts, right? And there's interplay amongst these things. I'm hearing a concern that the concern is being flat out stated that there's a concern that CSS will be under enrolled, right? And so if that happens and how soon that happens, like, what's the plan? So I think that with the pieces, the challenges of what we're looking at is when we look at a specific piece, there are lots of pieces that we're looking at in here, and there's interplay amongst them. And so I think that as we go through and say, what does that look like? I think the question we asked initially in our small group was, what will be the barriers, right? Like, so are there barriers to students? What I'm hearing it as, are there barriers to students staying in CSS at what grade level, right? And that we need to articulate what that looks like or what those are, and then how are we going to respond to that as a district? So I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've heard is I hear that there's concern, right? That projecting forward that there would be a loss of students, and part of what we need to say is, and to understand, is we have to unpack that concern a little more deeply. So that's my initial. It's going to be an unsatisfactory answer, I'm sure, at some level. But there are a variety of pieces that are moving in concert, and so we're going to have to examine that as well.
I think it's that, Margaret, but I think it's also the broader issue, the even bigger picture issue of, like, hearing the district say, like, yes, we totally understand, for example, if in the scenario B where this is at Arleta, we're asking a lot of Arleta here, right? Like going from K to 8 to K5 back to K to 8 again. Here is why we think that based on the goals we're trying to achieve here, it's still okay to ask them to do that, right? Or something with Woodstock, there'd be massive impacts at Woodstock too. So I think you're right, but also I'd like to be able to answer that bigger question.
Okay, recognizing we just have about 2 more minutes for discussion. Are there other issues anyone would like to raise or questions? And we are capturing the chat as well. Thank you. Okay. So we do want to speak to where we go from here and what happens next. I do want to reiterate, I put in the chat, we will have the Miro board safely locked. So all of your ideas and thoughts and concerns and questions will be saved as they are, but you will also be able to come in and access these maps and dig into it as much as you want, as well as the dashboard. We will be holding office hours for the dashboard for people to go through that again if you need to or want to learn more about that and feel more comfortable in that. Who is going to speak to where we go from here? Is that Megan?
So we have all your information and we've collected all the data. Thank you so much for the hard work today. We know we had more questions than answers. What we're going to do next is we're going to gather all the information that we collected today. We'll go back to the drawing board as a district team. We'll look at them. We'll sort them into categories. We'll provide answers for the ones that we can provide answers for. And for the ones that require a little bit more time, we'll do the research to find the information to support them. And then we'll meet again, I believe it's on the 4th of November. I think that's our next meeting because this one was moved back 1 week. And hopefully have enough information at that time to share concerning some of the questions that came up.
And then what happens beyond November 4th? What is the arc of this?
So we meet every 2 weeks and we design our meetings based on the input we get from the previous meeting and the overall direction of the charge, which is to find a home for K-5 students at Harrison Park, turn Harrison Park into a middle school, and then increase the enrollment at Lane. So however that manifests for us, after we present the information to you and after we go back and take your input and redesign, we continue to just revisit the scenarios, reshape the scenarios until we get something that we can all at least live with. One thing I want to remind people is that this is a very complex process. It is also an incredibly challenging process. So I am sure that we all won't get 100% of what we truly desire. So we do need to continue to emphasize and stress the need to keep students at the center, academic achievement at the center, and a high quality education at the center of all our discussions moving forward.
Thank you, Esther. That is a really good reminder. This is Southeast Portland, 21 schools, incredibly complex in a growing city. And that's a huge task you're all shouldering. And representing all of the folks who can't be here is a just giant weight, and you should be commended for what you're doing and struggling with this information.
I also want to say, and if Shanice Clark is in the room, maybe she can share more, that we know that we need to hear from others and that you're doing an amazing job of representing and sharing the voices you know, but we do need to open it and you want to hear from others. Beginning the week of November 8th, there will be numerous opportunities and a broad survey for community members to share their feedback on these plans. Some of those sessions will be language specific and for affinity groups. So we'll be able to share more information about that detailed schedule with you in the next couple of days.
The other thing I want to say is I do want to thank our principals for all their input, investment, and time. We meet with them on Mondays after our general meeting. So if there's anything that comes up for you after you leave this meeting, please connect with your principals and they will let us know. The other thing that we've asked them to do is during their coffee chats or principal chats to at least try to get some more information from the broader community that may not be represented here or may not have their voices heard just because they're not represented. Maybe that's a smaller, safer, more risk-free environment for them So they should reach out into that community and see if they can at least get them to the table to hear what they think and get their input to us. In the meantime, please continue to send in your questions, send in your comments, your recommendations, and your suggestions.
And recognizing, as Esther said last time, the passion that is involved in this, and everyone representing not only your schools and your areas, but your children. I appreciate the way you showed up today. It was nice. It was a nice way to be together discussing a very difficult topic. And on that
Can we
note,
plug Discord too? Is that where we should continue this if we have additional questions? I feel like not that many people are on there, but it would be good to get more people on there between meetings.
Well, that's why we're hoping that when the principals have the community meetings, the coffee chats and so on, that they'll be able to encourage a lot more participation that way as well.
Oh, I mean, even just
Discord
within
is just
the group.
for Southeast Guiding Coalition folks, right?
Right. So basically,
oops, you muted yourself, Andy.
I was saying, go look at Megan's email about Discord from the other day. I would love to see more people on Discord because it feels like we have more we could process/talk about over the next few days.
Also in your shared Google Drive of the instructions of how to join Discord, and it's a specific link. And yes, this is just for Southeast Guiding Coalition members, but this is also a public platform. So anything in there is public record.
Again, the recordings of our meetings are posted on our website. So if you want to revisit it or maybe take a closer look at some segments of it, you're welcome to do that as soon as they're posted. I think Megan tries to get it up there as quickly as possible. I want to say give her 48-hour turnaround or maybe a little bit more. And, continue to send your questions. Anything more, Mani, that we have to?
I think that's all of our housekeeping, and it's our time, and we recognize it's Halloween weekend, which I know is very important to a lot of people. And as we did a check-in, why don't we do a checkout in the chat? So just with a couple of words, how about if we just end on a Halloween note and say, what's your favorite Halloween candy? Just put it in the chat. We'll sort of turn our brains from this heavy weight to maybe trick-or-treating.
And Megan, will you
candy corn fight me? It's my favorite, Sandra. I love candy corn. Sorry, Esther, I spoke over you.
Oh, no problem. I was just going to ask Megan if she was going to email the feedback form out to people, or how do they give us feedback from this meeting?
So generally I send out the meeting evaluation. I also sent it out yesterday, I believe, as well. I can send that out again for your meeting evaluation. And we do read your responses. We take that in, kind of create PPS responses, turn into a Q&A for us as we do process week to week to address concerns. And thank you for your patience. I know trying to get all of this information out and making sure we're getting materials translated. I'm trying to keep everything uploaded in our shared Google Drive. So that is where you will find those materials. And you can always email me directly if you have concerns or any access issues.
Thank you all very much for your commitment, your time, your engagement. I think we're better off just because you showed up this morning, and we'll be even better off on the 4th. Have a great weekend. Stay safe. Again, give us your best Halloween costume. Is that what you said, Mani?
Candy, your favorite candy.
Candy, okay.
So good.
This is public record too, people, so make sure you get it in.
Enjoy the rest of your time. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.